And once again, we are back. I'm Robert Craig, your host for another episode of Just an Old Man Reading from His Bible. I'm the old man, and this is the Bible right here, the Holy Bible. That's the one I use, and I want you to take a good look at these letters here that are imprinted into the cover, King James Version. I think that's what makes it the Holy Bible. Maybe that's just me, though, but I think I'm right. We've come to the last part of chapter 2 of Galatians, and Paul has just covered his attendance at the Jerusalem Council and the outcome. Of course, if you look in Acts 15, you'll see that they disavowed these men that showed up in their name. The phrase they used was, "To whom we gave no such commandment." So they totally denied them or disavowed them. So he finishes up on the council, "Only they would that we should remember the poor, the same which I also was forward to do." So they agreed on that much. And they agreed to divide up their territory, so to speak, that they would only go to the circumcision and he would go to the heathen. Well, that's us, by the way. Now, beginning here in verse 11, he'd been talking about how Peter was his ally at the council, but he says, "But when Peter was come to Antioch." Now, when was Peter come to Antioch? Well, I believe it has to be during that time when Paul and Barnabas were still partners, because pretty soon after they returned from this council, their partnership was dissolved, and Paul set off on the second journey with a new partner. Actually, it was Silas who had come up from the council with him. So Peter was at Antioch at a certain time. He says, "But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James." Now, these who came from James, we've only got one time of record in Scripture that happened, and that was Acts 15, the Judaizers. "But before they came, he did eat with the Gentiles. But when they were come," that is, these members of the little flock, self-appointed watchmen of the faith, "he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation." That's just a good old-fashioned word for hypocrisy. "But when I saw that they walked not uprightly, according to the truth of the gospel," this was breaking up their fellowship, dividing them into groups and cliques, and Paul wasn't going to have it. "When I saw they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, If thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews?" In other words, the action Peter was taking there, he was bowing to the pressure of these Judaizers that were coming in. Verse 15, "We who are Jews by nature," in other words, people who are ethnically Jews, "and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ." I've been hearing a little bit of a tiff going on between certain people. I'm sure they think they're right, and I don't know if they're just arguing over semantics or whether they truly have been misled or they just need to go back to grammar school. They don't like the King James because in places like this, and there's several others, it talks about the faith of Christ. And they'll say, well, that couldn't be Jesus' faith because he didn't need faith. Well, grammatically, I suppose they're right, because to need faith means that you're lacking in faith. And he often upbraided his disciples by saying things like, "O ye of little faith," or "if you had but the faith of like a mustard seed." And he upbraided them for not having faith. I think if you wanted to say he didn't need faith because he had no lack of faith, that would be grammatically correct. But I don't think that's what they meant, and I don't think you think that either. But that's how he's explaining it to them, that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Wouldn't it be something if we could all be justified by our faith? Wow. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified, and here's repeated again, by the faith of Christ, and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. But if while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners, is therefore Christ the minister of sin? God forbid. For if I build again the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. In other words, he's saying, I'm not going to go back into the law. I'm not going to let anyone else be drugged back under the law. For I, through the law, am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. See, there's 3 times in that short passage that his faith is mentioned. And they stamp their feet and say, Jesus didn't need faith. Or they'll say, this teacher thinks Jesus needed faith. You need to mark and avoid him. Wow. Well, if you're going to mark and avoid anybody that goes by this, I'm not highly educated. I'm just dumb enough to believe that it means what it says. Verse 21, I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Now, what I wanted to talk about, beside that important issue, is when was Peter at Antioch? Acts 10, we saw him. He was out from Jerusalem, and he got called over to preach to the house of Cornelius. And when he came back in the early part of chapter 11 of Acts, his fellow elders upbraided him for going in to Gentiles. And he had to explain himself, and they saw that God was opening a way for Gentiles to be saved. And in Acts 11, starting with verse 27, this is after Peter returns. And this is up in Antioch, along about the same time. This is after the time when Paul has been brought over from Tarsus to work with Barnabas in that church at Antioch. Verse 27 of chapter 11, and in these days came prophets from Jerusalem unto Antioch. And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit there should be great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. They were in financial straits because before Paul came along, they'd been looking for the tribulation to come, a time when they wouldn't need money, they wouldn't need clothing or food, according to the teaching of Jesus, that they were going to be provided for by their Father in heaven. And it didn't come to pass, and that kind of left them high and dry. Well, that money that they had sold all their land and put it in a common kitty, and it was drying up. So they were kind of in a bad shape there. So they send a gift to them to relieve them. And about that same time, something else was happening. Chapter 12, verse 1. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. That was the disciple James. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Now Peter's in prison, and Herod's planning on bringing him out and executing him after Easter. And the day before he was to be executed, verse 7, behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on his side, and raised him up, saying, arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, gird thyself, and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, cast thy garment about thee, and follow me. Well, the angel leads him out, the gates open. He takes him a block or so and departs from him, leaves him. And in verse 11, and when Peter was come to himself, he said, now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when we see Jews, usually it means unbelieving Jews. Those that were adherents of Judaism only. Verse 12, and when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. Now, this is very, I don't know, it just seems kind of, well, like a coincidence. This is where Mark lives, and you're going to see that Mark goes back to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas. See, Mark is his nephew, and Peter explains to them what happened. Here in verse 17, it says that he told them, go show these things unto James and to the brethren, and he departed and went into another place. They were very non-specific about where this other place was, but I have my suspicions. Later on in the same chapter, this is the last verse of that chapter, and Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their ministry, and took with them John, whose surname was Mark. Could it be that they were in contact with the people in the same house that Peter went to deliver his message? Could it be that when they went back to Antioch, they might have had a stowaway in their group, maybe traveling incognito? And could it be that he kind of hid out there waiting for the death of Herod so he could come back and not face execution. Well, that's pure conjecture, but if you've got a better theory, I'd like to hear it. And we'll pick up on chapter 3 next time. May the Lord bless this reading of His Holy Scripture. And I do appreciate those of you that watch my videos. I hope you're getting something out of them. If you don't agree with me, maybe at least it'll cause you to think. And I do leave my comments open on my YouTube videos. I don't get notifications, but I do find them eventually. And sometime this video will probably go onto YouTube. You can comment there too. If you disagree with me, I'm fine with that. If you want to show me where I'm wrong, I'd appreciate it if you would use a Bible like this one. Otherwise, we'll have no common ground. We'll continue on in chapter 3 next time, and I hope to see you then.